Hello friends, welcome to another GameMaker tutorial. This tutorial today will be more about how GameMaker is built up and how you get into GameMaker for all those you newcomers to the program and how you make games in it. It will not be showcasing how you make a game, it will more be like the interface I'm going to talk about. So hopefully you will enjoy. When you start off GameMaker, you can then create a new project. We'll just make one called example, and you will have this interface. My icons over here is pretty big, and you might have a dark color interface. You can change that, and I will show you how later. But first I will go over the resources and the top bar here. You can choose your target platform. If you have the free edition of GameMaker, you can only create games for Windows. But as you buy more modules, and if you buy Professional or Master Edition, you have these different things to choose between. For example, I don't have these Yo-Yo compiler things, so I wouldn't be able to create something in it. And I don't have iOS, and you can see here, then I can buy it if I want to, but let's just choose Windows for starters here. I am using GameMaker in Steam, so I have this now new IDE button. If you not have it on Steam, you don't have it. The only thing it does is that it creates a new window, so you can have multiple windows of GameMaker ready. And of course there's the workshop and stuff like that play, and that's just also Steam. But it only creates a new window, and of course if you don't have Steam, then that's not a problem, just opening a new window of GameMaker from the shortcut. So that's pretty easy. Other important stuff up here is the run the game and run the game in debug mode, and of course the stop web server or stop the program. And the only thing this does is after you have created some code and some rooms and stuff like that, I will come into that in a moment, then you can test it up here, or you can have a debugger with it, so you can see if there's some errors or something you could do faster, and then you can stop it from here. So you don't have, if you, for example, it's not running in window mode but haven't made a exit button yet, then you can just stop it from here. So that's pretty nice, and that's the most important stuff up here, the things I use at least. A good thing to know also is the content here, where you can seek out functions and stuff like that. That's pretty nice to know, and it's always a good idea to know the GMC forum, GameMaker community. It's just I'll put a link over here. You can see that it's not a clickable link, but there will be a clickable link in the description, don't worry, because I cannot link to such sites in YouTube. But this is the site, you can find it in the description. Also up in file here, you can create a new project, open all the standard, and then you can create application. There's also a button here, and that's when you're done with your game, you can create the executable, and then you have the game. You can also choose to create a installer, which you can change in the global game settings, but we'll come to that in a moment. And then we got the preferences, and in here you can change a lot of how GameMaker looks and acts. You can change what folders are used, and it's pretty self-explanatory what the things does. It's written as you tick it off and off, on and off. For example, you have some themes down here you can change. If you change them, it will only change when you have reopened GameMaker. So, and you can check. I have the big resource tree icons on my ticked with me, and that's simply because in these tutorials it's easier for you to see the icons in the site then. And then there's some forms, when you're coding and stuff like that. You can change the editors, so you can, for example, have a custom program to write the code in instead of the standard. I'm just using all the standards because I quite like it. And of course there's Spine and Flash 2, and that's simply because of some of the new functions you have. And this is then linked to, I have Spine installed, so I can edit my Spine files from here. from in GameMaker. And there's some web stuff here, web server and Android, and there's a lot of setups. I will not go over all of them, but that depends on what you are creating. For example, here you can fill this out if you need to make Android applications. If you have, it will check if you have the SDK, Android SDK, NDK, and Java JDK installed. But that's a longer story. This is just, you can change things how they look in the preferences and how they act, and that's a nice customizability. So that's cool. But the most important thing to know is this resource tree on the left, and then there's this compile message, which can either be down here, and you can also just close it, and it will pop up when you are creating executables, and it's just telling what's happening when it's executed, when it's creating it, so you can see if there's an error someplace, it will write it. But there's a resource tree here, and for example, there's the sprites. That's all the images and animated images you will use for your objects and your figures in the game, your stuff. And there's a sprite editor. Now we just made 32 times 32, where you can draw something yourself. You can load something in PNG files, and of course you can make animations by having multiple images, and it will animate, and that's great. You can change what the origin is. That's if you, for example, if you draw the sprite at 0.0 in the room, then if I have the coordinate at 0, 0, then it will just draw it from 0, 0 and down. If I have it in the center, then it will be centered at 0, 0 instead. So that's just, and you can just press enter here, and you can of course do some stuff here too. There's some texture settings. I will not go into depth with that, but that's simply to do with the texture page it is saved on when created, and then you can choose to use precise collision checking or not. And there's some settings here, and you can make a custom mask and stuff like that. And that's simple. If you want two objects, two sprites to touch each other, if they're touching each other, something happens, then if they're clicked on with the mouse or something, then it will check on this mask, so it will precise, then it will always check if you exactly press on it, or else it will just make a square mask holding the image. And of course precise marks are slower, and square is not as is faster. Then there's sounds, where you can load in some MP3s or WAV files, I think it is, and they will be converted to OGG files when the game is created, but until then they'll just be as they are, and you can compress them, you can change the sound quality, and on this way have everything easy to do. Then there's backgrounds. These cannot be animated, and can of course is single images then. So if we have one that is 100 by 100, for example, we can draw something. We can say it should be black with and it's the same sprite editor, except you cannot animate this. But this is also not taking up as much resources, and there's no marks on them. It's purely used as the background in the room or foreground and stuff like that. One thing you can do, however, is use it as a tile set. As you can see now, I've got a lot of grid here. Standard is 16 by 16 and with no offset. You can have some offset on it. You can so it starts like from 6 on, and you can make some separation in between each tile depending on how you set it up. But so you can have sort of a tile set then, and then you can place them. We'll save this as a tile set, and you can place them individually in the room. And then we have path and scripts and shaders and fonts and timelines. I will come back to them in a moment. The next important thing is rooms, objects, which you will use. And objects is sort of the base of everything. It is, if you know programming, objects is sort of this is the class, and then when you place them in the room, you create individual objects. If you do not know it, the important thing to know is that this is containing all the code, and each object is normally sort of a figure for itself in the code. For example, you can have one you will call object player, and we will give it the sprite we created before. You can set the depth. The depth is how they are sorted on the screen. So if the lower the depth is, the more in front of everything else it would be, and the higher the depth is the more in the background it will be. It's a little confusing, but when you get used to it, you will get used to it. So often I will have like -5 for my player, and background will automatically be played in the back, and foregrounds in the front of everything. So it's pretty easy. You can set a parent, and then it will. It's a little more advanced, but then it will inherit the code from another object, as well as having its own code, and its own code can override the old one. But that's cool for if, for example, you have multiple player classes, then you can have a parent player object, and then you can just write this extra code for each class instead of have 4 different objects who all have the same code plus a little more, so it doesn't feel as much in the program. And then you can have a mask, so you can create another sprite up here and use it as a mask instead, so you can make a more customized mask. And the objects in GameMaker are based on events. It's not just one long code you're writing. There are some events, and they are executed in a specific order. Again, everything I tell here I will tell about sort of loosely, and then you can always go to the GameMaker forum or read the help file as I showed earlier, and you can go a lot more in depth when you need to. But there's, for example, the create event, which is executed when one time and one time only when the object is created. Then you can just add some. No, let's talk the events first. Then you can, that's the destroy event, which is executed also one time when the object is destroyed. Then there is alarms, which you can set alarms so that it, for example, counts to 60, and when it comes to 60, then it will execute this piece of code, and then you can reuse them as much as you want. You can key press events, so every time you press a specific key or release a specific key or hold a specific key, something will happen. Or mouse events, both normal and global, meaning normal is if you press on this object, then this happens, for example, and global is if you press anywhere on the screen, this thing happens. And there's some special ones I will not go in depth with, but for example, game start or room start. And async I don't think you will need if you're a beginner, but collision with another object or the like, and collision, for example, will execute every time you collide with another object in the game. And then, for example, if your object is a car and you then collide with another car, you can make it explode or something. And step event, you have 3 events: begin, end, and normal step, and they are executed first. The begin step is executed, then the step, and then the end step. So you can decide what will happen, and all of these are executed every game step of the game. A game step is every iteration the code is run, every iteration that the game resets. Imagine you have, if you imagine this is all the code in the game. You have like we have some start code here. We have some player moves left. This is not actual code. And enemy moves right. This is just an example, a very bad example, but an example. Then every time that this is the whole game code. It goes all the code through in the game, all the behind the scenes stuff, all the events of every object in a specific order. Then when it comes to the end, it will restart. But for example, it will only take the create event once in the first iteration when it's created, and then it will not do it again. But the step event, it will redo every time this restarts. So normally you will have like controls and stuff like this in the step event if you're not using the keyboard events, of course. And I prefer using making my events, making my motion in the step event, but that's just me. Sorry, I sidetracked there. But every time, every step, this will happen. And as a standard, the room speed of GameMaker, as you will see in a moment, is 30 steps per second, 30 frames per second. So there will be, every second there will be 30 steps, and you can use that to calculate how fast things are going. You can change that for every room, and you can change it on the run. There's nothing you cannot change. 30 is fine. Often in games today 60 is used, 45 is fine too. Above 60, not every computer that can handle the speed, and therefore they will just cap down to 60 or something what they can handle. So I will recommend you're not using more than 60, unless you're of course calculating the movement based on the speed of, but that's more advanced. But then this will happen. So for example, we can say, and I will just use the drag and drop here, which is great for beginners of GameMaker. Then you can always use code blocks for more advanced things, or when you are getting used to it. Normally when I program, I'm only using code, but you have all these functionalities in drag and drop. And if you go to the forums, you can find libraries, as they're called, where you can get in more functions that other game makers have created for drag and drop. So you can use drag and drop for a long while and still make some pretty great games. But of course, sometime you will want even more, some more control, and then you will begin using code. But yeah, for example, we can say that every step we want our player to move once on the x scale, the x coordinate relatively to its position, so it will move one to the right. This is to the right, one pixel to the right every step. That's a piece of code here, and then we can say there is some often, how can I say this best way? Often in programming, always in programming actually, everything is based on if and loops and some statements, some questions they are asking in the program. For example, you can here ask, and that's all they are illustrated in purple and in octagons. But that's asking a question, and then if this question is true, as like if you ask, am I green? Then if you are green, then you can make something specific happen. Like right now, we can say we can have a chance on here, a random function here, and say if we have a dice with 16 sides, how much chance is there that that it will hit a specific side? That's what chance here is. And if this is true, then we will move our player to position 100 and 100. And this is not relative, so we will jump to that exact position every time this is true. So now our player should move, and then randomly at points jump back to a specific position. And this is how it works. A lot of programming and most programming is that you have a lot of questions and to see if something is happening, and that decides how you're controlling stuff. You can also say if this key is pressed, then do this, or if this key is pressed and this key is pressed and this key is pressed, then do this. So that's pretty normally. And if you just in drag and drop, if you want to have like if this and this and this, then you will just place them after this. So this and this. So but again, you have a lot more freedom when you begin using code. You can, from the start, from the get-go, use code. And for example, a code block is, then you need to write things instead. So you can say if x equals, and then there's some syntax. In GameMaker, it's very forgiving. You can use x is just a single equal. In other programming language, you'll need to write 2 equal signs, and I'm trying to get accustomed to that, so I will do that when I write code. It's a good thing to know from the get-go, make it easier to learn stuff from the start. But then you can have like if x equals let's say, or if x is bigger than or equals 400, then you will have this code block, and it will say if this is true, then x equals 0, and then a semicolon. You do not need this in GameMaker. Again, very forgiving language, but this using of semicolons, but it's a good habit to have, get accustomed to. But we'll just say every time our player is above position x position is above or equals to 400, that's what this one checks, then this will happen. So that should show sometimes true. And you can add commentary in code. For example, you can say double / will make a comment. This will not execute as code. So you can say this is a test. Then you can write it as you want. If you want a whole block of code to be a comment, you can do like this, and you can write normal code after this. That's just a asterisk and a forward comment / sorry. And so that's code as you can write it in blocks. And the last event we have here is the draw event, and the one you will use the most is probably just the draw. There's also a draw GUI event that will draw everything at the. That's a little more advanced. I don't think I will, but it will draw everything at the same scale depending on how you scaled in the game and stuff like that. But a draw event is what you will use, and there's some draw functions here. You can draw the sprite. You can draw as a standard. If you have no code in this draw event, then it will just draw your sprite as is. The moment you put code into here, it will not do that, except if you do it yourself. But there's this draw self, then it will draw yourself, and then we can say it will draw a rectangle at 400, 500, and this is just the positions of the first up here is the position of the top left corner, and this is the position of the bottom right corner, and we say we want it filled. And right now it will just use the standard color, the color, the last color selected, but we can set the color here and say that we want it should be blue. So that's how objects work in the grand scheme of things. Then there's rooms, and if you try to test this, you will see a game must have at least one room to run, and that's because that's where everything happens. A room is standard, just set to 640 by 480, and the room speed is, as I said before, 30. And it got a name, of course. We'll just call this test room. You cannot use spaces in any names on any things, but you can use underscores. And we will say this is 800 by 480, that's fine. And then in objects here, we will place our player. and you can then add tiles. As I said earlier, we will set the grid to be 16 by 16 instead, and then you can use the tiles to either draw something or play specific stuff. And as you can see, I can select what tile from the image I want to use, so that's pretty cool. And that'd be like this. And physics I will not go into because that's some extra functionality, but you can read on that in the forums. Views is what part of the room you want to see. So if we enable the use of views and this make view 0 visible, you can see the standard size of a view is just 640 by 480, and that's fine with us. Then we can make it follow an object. We want it to follow object player, and we want it to we just write a large value down here, so make sure that we are always centered in the view, except when the view is always inside the room when following a player, so it will not go outside of the room, so it will stop at some point, just so you know. And you can also set a background color, or you can choose a background to use as a normal background here. We just have no background, we'll set the color to white, for example, and you can even set a background speed so the background moves. And there's a lot of it is self-explaining. So depending on your settings, it will warn you if there's anything outside of your room. We had some tiles outside, then it asks if it should delete them. If we want the tiles to be outside the room, then we just say no. Else we can just say yes, and it will automatically remove the tiles from outside the room, so only things inside the room is here. Yes. So now we can actually run our game and test it. And as you will see here, when we run it, boom, 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 it will write a lot of stuff down here, what happens. And we have our player moving here, and you can see he keeps jumping back to this position because the chance thing. And we're drawing the square at 400 by 400 to 500 by 500. That's going outside the room, but that's okay. And if we remove the chance thing here or set it to like way more, so now it will never happen almost, then we will see that it will move a lot more here, and when it gets above what is 400, then it will go back, boom. And you could see the view was moving with it, so your camera of the game was moving with it. And that's in the whole thing, how GameMaker works, and how you make things move around and stuff like that. You're welcome to write specific questions in if there's some interface related stuff you do not understand. I will gladly explain it, and if it's more complex, I will make a spin-off video you will be able to find in this video, and I will just make some annotations to link to it. But this is the whole how GameMaker works. There's some more things, you can make it solid and not solid. This is how, if you want to use the physics as we didn't go over, you can make it persistent so that when you go to a new room, this one will follow, and you can make it invisible or visible. It's depending on if you want it to be shown in the room. You can also make the rooms persistent. So for example, if you destroy an object in the room, then go to another room, then go back to this room, then the thing will still be destroyed if it's persistent, instead of you just restarting the room. Normally, if it's not persistent, then the room will be as you set it up every time you go to it. So depending if you want to have like a role-playing game where you can destroy environment or something, or whether it's quests, logs and stuff like that, or if you just want it to be a level like in Mario, then that's the ways to do it. There's also the creation code, like the creation event in the object. This code will be executed when the room is created. And again, if it's persistent, it will only be created one time. If it's not persistent, then it will be created every time that the room is created. Also, if you right click on an object in the object menu, of course, here on an object, I just create a new play object. There's some functionality too. There's a shortcut to edit the object, so it will find it in the resource tree for you. And you can read about it, you can snap it to the grid and whatever you want. But the thing I want to show here is the creation code here. That's another code segment. So you can say individually for each object, even if they're on the same type, you can say image blend is C red. This is just some code making the color of the sprite. It will colorize the sprite you have, so it becomes this color. It will actually not show because we have black. Black cannot be mixed with any color to make other color because it's black. But if we make a white sprite here instead, then this will be colored too. And the way it colors things when you're image blending, you can also do it in drag and drop. You cannot access these code blocks as drag and drop, but you'll see the new one we created up here is now red. Boom, boom. I think that was about that for all the things you're probably gonna use. Then there is some other things when you're using code or something, or you can also find scripts on the forum. But there's this create script, which is a piece of code you can call from any object. So if you have like a standard, what could it be? A standard physics code you have created or something, making sure that you are bouncing off of the right stuff and stuff like that, then you can write this code instead of writing the same code in every object where it's needed. Then you can just write some code here and then call this code. And the way you do that is just then go to control here. You can see there's this small icon looking like this one, and you will just use that, choose the scripts, and then the arguments used again. A little more advanced, but you can learn more about it on the forums. I cannot stress enough because it's a lot of, I cannot go through everything in the whole software. That would take a way too long video. This is sort of just the stuff I think is important for you to know as a beginner. Normally it's a little easier telling about a specific, for example in my making a platformer series, it's a little more easy to tell about a specific project. This is a little meta and therefore a larger thing to talk about. But I hope you are getting something out of this anyway. One thing that's nice to know is variables is a great thing to have in this when programming. A variable is something you call, for example, you can call one called speed, SPD is short. There's some in-game variables you don't want to reuse. For example, there's one called speed. So we'll not write speed because that will confuse because there's multiple variables with that name. But if you choose to call one, for example, speed here, SPD, and set it to 4, that will be a variable containing that. You can change that at any point. If you take just after that, say no, speed is actually 2, then it will change the same variable to that. But that's variables, they're cool. Then, for example, in here, you can just write speed instead. So instead of moving 1, then it will move speed. So it will move that speed. And then we can say 2 here instead. So let's have an open instead. And then we can say speed is 1. Let's say out of 20, so it doesn't happen too fast. But now it will change the speed at some point to 1, and that's just cool. And that's what variables does. Sorry, that was not needed. they change stuff. They make some things more variable. They make things changeable. But that's about it for the important stuff. Then there's shaders, which are too advanced if you're new to GameMaker, but you can find them on forums too. Fonts is just you can load in different fonts to use and then write in the game. Timelines is a how is this best described? It's a series of code entries, like steps. So you can say on step 1 something happens, then on step 8 something else happens. So you can have it sort of do a specific sequence of code with specific pauses between steps. I have not used it a lot. I know how it works and stuff like that, but I have not used it a lot myself because it's not been needed for me. But it can be pretty cool to use. And then, just like events and stuff, you just drag and drop in and all the code blocks if you want those. And then you can make that work. So for example, if you make one here, we can say, oops, not use code blocks in this example right now. But we can say at part 0 here, we will move 10 down, and then at part 8 here we will move minus 10, so move 10 up instead, and then it will do this when we say at step 50 it will move. Sorry, it's a habit opening these code blocks when writing code because I'm not used to drag and drop anymore. It's a lot of years since I was using this as my coding technique. So then we can say minus 50. So now it will do this when the timeline is executed, and we can do it in here actually. We can say if out of 50, let's do that for some less chance. Then we can, now where is it? I think it is in main 2 here. We can set a timeline. We can choose the timeline we created. Start, don't loop. Yes. And now this will happen every time the chance is done, and it will make this small. As you can see, it moved 50 up, so it was a lot, and it happened often. But that's just how it happens. 50 was maybe a little overkill, but again, you can always go in and change the timeline here, and say we don't want this part, delete. Yes, and then it will be. I will just move 10 down, 10 up, 10 down, 10 up every time it happens. So you can see it will keep doing that. And the last thing is paths, and that's simple. You can draw a specific path around in like this in the room. You can make it display the room if you want. So if it's a specific room you make it for, but that's just simply you can make something follow the path. You can also like smooth it out so it's a smooth curve instead and stuff like that. But then you can have an object follow the path in the code too. So that's, for example, if you have in a platformer game, you have a bat enemy flying around, you can make it fly around in a specific formation, specific track, so it doesn't fly around too randomly. But I think this is all. No, one last thing. Constants is. Two last things. Constants are some variables you cannot change through the game. And often they are written in the uppercase. So for example, we can say one called test, and that will always be 4, for example. Then throughout the game, you cannot change it. Test will always be 4 if you write test, with uppercase, of course. Game information, you can just write some information here. You can make a display in the game. And then in global game settings, there's some different settings you can make. There's a game identifier, which is a unique ID for your game. There's some texture groups you can make. They are not as important in Windows as in other things, but more important in Android and stuff like that, where it's pretty important that you are not using too big textures and stuff like that. You can have some project info, and then there's some stuff for all the different things you can create games with, both for Windows, Mac, and if you go for the Windows, because that's what we're doing right now, you can have a display name in your for the game. You can change the splash screen, the icon. If you are using the free version, I don't think you can change the splash screen. You can change the icon for the game, which of the 2 places here that the game should save information, and you can write some information. Graphics, you can make colors interpolate between pixels. If you want sharp pixels, then you don't want this on. If you want it to be a little blurred out, a little smoothing between the pixels, then you keep this on. You can start in full screen mode. You can choose the size of the texture pages. Again, not as important in this. You should have a texture pages at least as big as your biggest sprite or background, because this is the pages you're saved for, and if the pages are small, then the sprites and backgrounds will just be resized when compiling, therefore making the graphics worse. And then you can of course use synchronization as in many games, and make the player able to resize the game window. I will not use this if you do not know how to write code to make the things scale properly in the game. Tutorials exist on that on the GameMaker forum. Please go to the GameMaker forum if you have any questions on this sort of search first. And if you cannot find it anywhere, some tutorials or stuff like that, then go to the proper forum and ask the questions. And you can change with how it scales, if it's full scale in the window or keeping aspect ratio. And then of course, if you choose to, when you create a game, create a installer, then you can show some graphics for that. But I think this will be everything for this tutorial here. I hope this was somewhat helpful. I was a little out of my normal, it's easier to talk about code for me. It's hard, but this is sort of the things I wanted to know when I started this, that was important for me. Again, the forums are the best place if you have any questions, but if you've got specific questions to the interface here, you're welcome to write in the comments, and I will try to answer them as well as I can. Hope you have enjoyed this video. A rating will be very much appreciated if you did, and I'll see you again in another tutorial, or in a gaming video, or something. I'll see you. Don't worry. Bye! Whoa! You seem to be at the end of the video. If you liked this video, or even if you didn't, it would make me incredibly happy if you would just rate it. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.